Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this good old Monday. Hopefully, you are in a warm area because I know there are some buildings on campus that are without heat. Luckily, in Hill Hall, we are not too cold over here. I know. So, just thank you again for being here. For those who don't know me, I am Dominique Johnson. I am the interim Director of Learning Support Services, and I'm also the coordinator for the Writing and Communication Center here at WSSU. So today I'm going to be talking about how you can create assignments for written communication student learning outcomes. So these are just some of the objectives that I have. So hopefully by the end of the workshop, you should be able to develop the ability to design assignments that align with the written communication student learning outcome, gain insights into crafting assignments that foster critical thinking, creativity, and effective communication skills among students, and create assessments that enhance the overall writing proficiency of students. So before we even jump into anything, I want to bring attention to this idea of knowing our students. In my research, I found that a lot of students who attend HBCUs, they often struggle to transition to academic writing. This is primarily due to the fact that they didn't write frequently in high school, or they weren't completing the type of assignments that require that higher education accessibility. So I know, with a lot of the students are coming from, pre-COVID and post-COVID. So there are a lot of deficiencies that I've noticed in the Writing Center and teaching Writing 1301. And what we want to do is continue to help students develop that formal writing skills and help them unlearn the bad habits that they unfortunately have learned in high school. So therefore, it's our obligation as faculty to recognize that students' past experiences may not be quote unquote up to par, and we have to effectively design assignments and provide support for those students as they continue to hone in on their skills. The key is to help students transfer the writing skills to other courses and professional settings. And I want to emphasize that it's the ability to transfer. Students really struggle with that. So with these courses that have written communication attached to them, we have to get them to practice these things so they can transfer those skills to their other courses and to whatever respective career field they'll be in. So this is the current definition of written communication that is posted on our website, and it is use appropriate language, conventions, organization, supporting evidence, and content to effectively communicate in writing for the purpose and audience. You want to keep this definition in mind as you are coming up with your assignments for written communication. Pretty much this means that in some assignments, they have to, again, use that formal language, writing conventions, practice organization, integrating evidence and supporting details, and again, effectively communicate in writing. I wanted to bring some attention to some expectations for the current course that is required for all students, which is Writing 1301, Introduction to Academic Writing. Hopefully, after the person has successfully completed the course, they should be able to do a couple of things. So first, they should be able to understand how to construct an effective thesis statement, how to know the difference between a claim and evidence, use appropriate language. Hopefully, they'll be able to recognize and refute counter arguments, demonstrate awareness of context, audience, and purpose, synthesize sources, analyze arguments, and the rhetorical moves made by the sources, understand the basics of MLA and APA, and reflect on their own writing practices. I wanted to talk about these expectations because pretty much once the student leaves Writing 1301, they're not going to be exposed to these other, you know, tasks that we talked about in Writing 1301. So it is our obligation again as faculty, as we're teaching the sophomore level, junior level, and senior level courses to re-emphasize these concepts. So again, they can transfer the skills and they're not losing sight of what was learned in Writing 1301. So like I said, you want to start looking at how can I integrate the things that the student should have completed in 1301 and integrate that into my own course. So you want to think about students that are sophomores, juniors, and even seniors, how they're reaching a certain benchmark level. And we'll take a look at the written communication rubric that's current. But again, you want to recognize that with writing 1301, they're not focusing on a specific discipline outside of writing. We're just kind of giving students an overview of writing conventions. So a lot of these practices, in biology, for example, or even clinical laboratory science, they're not necessarily getting that specific discipline writing style. So that means as faculty, you want to emphasize those conventions in your courses and continue to hone in those skills. For example, a lot of students are not going to be exposed to engaging in scholarly research because we just don't have the time in writing 1301. So that means you want to show them how to research the library databases and find those scholarly sources. You will also want to give them practice of the discipline-specific genres, like I said, and also take some time to give them an idea about how to write a lab report, abstract, executive summaries, because again, they're not necessarily exposed to these things in writing 1301. And you also want to help them emphasize how to integrate quotes and paraphrase sources. So this is the current written communication rubric for Gen Ed courses. And you see that there's 4 levels. So we have capstone, milestone, benchmark, and baseline. If you teach a Gen Ed course, so like a freshman or sophomore level course, more than likely you want to pretty much assess the student at benchmark or baseline. So we shouldn't be at expectation in a Gen Ed course, especially on the freshman and sophomore level, that the student should be at capstone. And that is primarily because, again, they have to have those foundational skills and build up to the capstone and milestone level. The key thing, and I'm going to re-emphasize this throughout my presentation, is to help students practice those formal writing skills and understand the writing process so they can reach the capstone level. So by the time they are a senior, they should be at that capstone level. Again, we don't want to assess a student that's a freshman or a sophomore at a capstone and make them have those expectations, because that means they don't have any room to grow. So that's why we want to make sure that we're creating assignments that does allow students to grow and reach that capstone level. So this is what I call the survival kit to creating assignments for written communication SLO. First, we're going to talk about creating effective learning outcomes. We're also going to talk about real-world application, scaffolding the assignments, making sure your assignment guidelines are comprehensive, and creating realistic rubrics. And of course, if you do have questions, please feel free to ask, stop me, or drop them in the chat. First thing is making sure that you're creating effective learning outcomes. And this is something that I typically do, is I establish learning outcomes for each assignment. And those learning outcomes are typically going to be connected to the course's learning outcomes, but they don't necessarily have to be the exact same. So for example, if you are teaching an analysis, right, the learning outcome for the assignment may be slightly different than the overall course about analysis. So it just then begins to help you align and connect with the learning outcomes and the broader goals for the written communication SLO definition. What I recommend that you do is look at Bloom's taxonomy and get an idea about how you can rephrase and shape your learning outcomes for the specific assignments. And just use some of those words like create, evaluate, analyze, apply, understand, and remember. This is how students start to make the connections between what they're learning in the course and what they're learning, what they need to know how to do for the specific assignment that you have given to them. With real world application, this pretty much means helping students understand that what we do in the classroom also is going to apply to their respective career field. That is a thing that students often struggle with. They often struggle with, why am I doing this? And I'll talk more about that. But it is our job as faculty to make sure they see how everything intertwines. So, for example, these are some things that you want to have them do when you are creating assignments. So help them practice their research skills. So you want to develop assignments that require research, which obviously is going to mirror the need to gather information and analyze them in professional settings. You also want to help them practice integrating resources and textual evidence, which also mirrors the demand of writing for credibility and citation. So if you have a student that wants to write a grant, they want to conduct research, having them integrate sources and textual evidence is going to give them that practice for when they start, in their career fields, looking at that research and documenting their sources. You also want to help them practice synthesizing information. So this kind of connects to the real world skill of deciphering and analyzing text. I know for me personally, I'm not a nursing major, and it takes me a while to decipher nursing information, but that's the thing. If I were a nursing major, I know I would have to decipher that text and then use that in my respective career field as a nurse. You also want to help them practice analysis and evaluation of sources, which also mirrors this idea about evaluating sources for credibility. So you definitely want to make sure you're incorporating some assignments that require evaluating sources. So that might mean an annotated bibliography, for example. You also want to have them develop and support claims. So guide students in making well-developed claims. And that also connects to articulating and defending positions in professional academic settings. I don't know about you all, but I know my students love to argue something. They love to argue that one artist is better than the other, or something is better than the other. So giving them the application does help them see how they can move that into a job. And then, of course, you do want to have them reflect on their writing practices and receiving feedback, because as professionals, you want to get in the habit of having continuous improvement and being receptive to feedback. So if they're reflecting on their own practices in your course and they are also receiving that feedback, they can take that skill to their respective career fields. But you want to keep in mind too, they should not only be reflecting, right? You want to take some of these things, and I would say take at least 3 of these things from this list and apply that to your courses. You don't want every assignment to just be a reflection, because it's not necessarily showcasing their skills to research, to integrate sources, to synthesize information. So it's critical to think about, how can I pick one of these options and showcase them these skills so they can transfer it to other courses. Are there questions so far, by the way? I'm talking a lot. Okay, just want to double check.
My only question
Yes.
is, yeah, sorry that I was late. My only question is, will this information be like emailed to us, or do we have access to this PowerPoint at all?
Yes, it's currently being recorded, and I think City will send it out. Am I right, Dr. Leverett?
Yes, that is correct. That city will, we will have a video on our city YouTube channel that's Ms. Johnson's information.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So now I want to talk about scaffolding versus sequencing. So scaffolding is the process of breaking down a larger assignment into smaller assignments that's going to pretty much help the students focus on skills and types of knowledge that require them to successfully complete a larger assignment. Now, sequencing is the process of arranging those scaffolded assignments in order, and basically to build them up towards the larger assignment. What I have found with scaffolding is that students are able to digest the information more, and they're able to apply the concepts that we go over more easily. So I like to say this thing called sequence scaffolding. So what you want to do, again, is take the student through the writing process and check in with them every step of the way to make sure that they're on track. So first, you may want to start with students brainstorming. So get them to discover their topic right away, and then have them create an outline. I typically have my students create an outline of just their thesis statement and topic sentences and have a proposal attached to it, and pretty much tell them you're going to apply your proposal to your final paper or your rough draft. And that thesis statement and those topic sentences have to be approved. So pretty much once they go into start writing their paper, there should be a foundation that they already have because we've done the planning stages beforehand. I always tell students, you have to plan out things before you start it, because if you don't plan it out, you're going to go into it blind and you're going to be very, very confused. So this does help give them focus. And it also helps give them some feedback as well before they start writing their rough draft. Of course, after they have moved from outlining, you want to take them through the rough draft process and, emphasize to use that outline that they created for their rough draft. After that, you'll evaluate those rough drafts. I say it would be easier to give that very, very specific feedback, so there's no room for ambiguity or error. So if you're noticing that a student is using too many quotes and not enough of their own voice, make a comment about that. If they're not using APA correctly, make a comment about it. The more that you give them feedback, the better that final draft is going to be. The next step is definitely to take them through the revision process. And I would say definitely have students understand the difference between low priority concerns and high priority concerns. A low priority concern, for example, is grammar. It's easy to fix grammar. It's not easy to fix content. So during the revision process, after you have given the student feedback, tell them, hey, you definitely want to focus on looking at your organization, looking at your thesis statement, making sure that you have enough supporting details and evidence, as opposed to focusing so much time on grammar. Because if the grammar is pristine, but the content is not, they might potentially fail the paper. So definitely get students to understand those priority concerns. And then after taking them through the revision process, show them that editing process. So, looking at grammar, mechanics, and citation as well, and then submit their final work for assessment. So you see here that, again, you're building the student to the final product, as opposed to, hey, just write a paper and there's no, I would say, process in the middle. So definitely, this is something I would consider doing as you are trying to figure out how you're going to create assignments for this written communication student learning outcome. So the other thing that you can do is have students complete a series of assignments. So they are pretty much putting various parts of the paper together for the larger assignment. So for example, maybe they do an analysis about their audience or their stakeholders. Maybe you have them come up with a research question or a thesis statement right away. Maybe you have them write a research proposal or an annotated bib. These are the type of things that are going to help them evaluate information, synthesize information as well, and evaluate sources. So that way you don't get an essay, for example, that has no credible sources, that hasn't necessarily been vetted, that doesn't have a thesis statement. So if you're giving them a small series of assignments to build up to that larger paper, then you get better results. So these are just some examples that you could do. So if you currently have a critical reading course, so maybe you have them read a chapter and explain the significance of that reading. Maybe the next one is to expand on that chapter reading and then turn it into a final product. So students start to see how everything is building upon what they're learning in each class. The main thing is just to give them feedback as they're going through these assignments, so they know how to improve and to complete that assignment successfully. So this is the thing that I love the most is comprehensive assignment guidelines. Obviously, an effective assignment guidelines are going to help provide a clear roadmap for students. It's going to help reduce confusion and promote students fulfilling the course's learning outcomes. It involves so much more than setting a word or a page count or picking a due date. And assignments that are clearly stated and relevant to the course curriculum are going to enhance the student learning, and it's also going to help bolster their academic growth. And to have an effective assignment, you want to contain as many details as possible to students to make sure that you're communicating the purpose and the steps they have to take to achieve that purpose and to be successful on that assignment. So these are just a couple of things that stand out to me when it comes to creating comprehensive assignment guidelines. When I was conducting my research, I found that an author said that students prefer guiding constraints when it comes to completing assignments. So the more detailed you are, of course, with a reason, is going to lead to more successful student responses. So things that you want to keep in mind is you want to use short, complete sentences and precise terms. This is really big. And this goes back to my point about knowing our students. So we are working with HBCU students who come from typically rural areas, are not necessarily being exposed to certain things. So I know sometimes casually in conversation, I'll bring up terms and students will not understand what I'm saying. So that means I have to, as I'd say to them, code switch and use language that's going to be more feasible and understandable to the student. So that's something that you want to do is making sure you're being as clear as concise when it comes to the words that you're using. You also want to explain to students what they have to do and how they have to do it. So that way they're able to understand how they have to complete each step and hopefully follow the directions accurately. Also, make sure that you're stating the purpose and goals of the assignment. So this is something that I mentioned earlier, is making sure that you answer the question, why are we doing this? Because students love to say that, right? So if they know the purpose and the goals of the assignment and how it connects to what they've already been doing in the classroom, then you've already beat them to asking the question, why are we doing this? And you also want to make sure that you are clearly articulating the type of assignment and the expectations. And by that, I mean, if the student is supposed to complete a research paper, tell them they are conducting research. If they're supposed to complete an analysis, let them know you are analyzing. This does help remove any ambiguity. So that's why you want to make sure that they know the type of assignment and the expectations and how they connect to each other. What I have found to also help students make sure they understand the assignment guidelines is encouraging them to choose relevant topics. It may be a good idea to provide students with previous chosen topics, even if you are creating an assignment from scratch. Just give them a list of options and options that are relevant to them and their major. It may also be very helpful to create a list of frequently asked questions. This also helps to avoid ambiguity. And it also shows the student that I'm ahead of you, right? So that way they understand that the other students potentially have struggled with assignment and had the same questions. So you're already a step ahead of it. I have found that sparking interest in the topic by highlighting the skills involved has been very helpful. So for example, if we are doing an analysis in class, I'll say, hey, this connects to the learning outcomes this way. It connects to your course in this way, or it connects to your major in this way. I think students need to see how it connects to who they are and their major and the course in order for them to get why are they doing this. So that brings me to my next point is to express the bigger picture to the students. So help them see how the purpose and goals of the assignment is going to contribute to their academic and professional development. And that one I think is really big for students, again, to help them transfer those skills. So you may feel like after you've implemented some of these things, especially with highlighting how it correlates with real world application, that your assignment guidelines may be long. But again, as I said, the more details, the better. So there's no room for ambiguity. So that way they can see how the skills they're acquiring for these assignments align with their academic and career requirements. So this is an example of like a vague guideline. So the prompt just says, select a topic that has impacted African American culture, either locally, nationally, or internationally. The format is APA. Length 4 to 5 pages. Source requirement 3 or more sources. So this is vague because it's not specific on the type of assignment that the student is doing. It's not clear about the type of sources that they have to use. And it's also not clear if this is supposed to be a personal opinion or if it's supposed to be like an evidence-based analysis. So to enhance that and make it clearer, we could say something like, based on the in-class discussions and course notes found in Module 1, select a topic that has impacted African American culture either locally, nationally, or internationally, and argue a specific point of view. Include evidence that you will find via research to back up the claims you make in your argument. Additionally, include a counter argument that discusses opposing views. Only write in third person. The format is APA 7th edition. You must include in-text citations. You don't need an abstract. Length 4 to 5 pages, and source requirement 3 or more peer-reviewed sources. So this is clear because it makes it clear to the student that they have to look at their course notes from Module 1. They have to look at the notes they potentially may have taken in class, select a topic, and argue. So immediately the student should know this is an argumentative paper, and that they also have to include evidence, and they have to include a counter argument as well. With only writing in third person being added, they know I can't include my own personal opinion. I can't say I can't say you and your. I'm clear about the format because APA obviously has been updated to 7th edition, and it's even more clear that they have to include in-text citations. So this is the thing with students. If you don't tell them they need to do it, they probably won't do it. So make sure you include something like that. And then for the source requirements, on the vague side, it just says 3 or more sources, but it doesn't say the type of sources. So the more specific you are and say that, okay, I need you to have peer-reviewed sources, then they won't go to the internet looking for online articles. So again, the clearer you are about your expectations, the more successful students will be in completing the assignment. So now I want to talk about realistic rubrics. And what I mean by this is making sure that you're using language that is constructive and supportive for the student rather than setting them up for failure. Pretty much what I am getting at with this is make sure you're not using language that could be potentially demeaning to the student or make them feel like they're never going to accomplish your rubric. It's going to help them reduce anxiety that they have about your expectations. It's going to help guide them through their development, make your grading easier. It's also going to help clarify expectations. So of course you want to pair your rubric with your assignment guidelines and they should pretty much match. And it's going to help students identify areas that need more focus and improvement. So I wanted to bring this back, the written communication rubric, because me personally, I don't use this rubric to assess individual assignments, only because of the type of students that I'm dealing with. Because I primarily work with freshmen, it's obvious that I expect freshmen to be at a baseline. But sometimes, some of the language in this rubric may not necessarily be helpful for certain assessments. So what I recommend that you do is, of course, use this rubric for the overall assessment for the university, but then create your own rubrics for individual assignments so that way it is clearer to the student. And it's also not necessarily I would say confusing, because again, it goes down to like the using of the big words thing. Again, we understand that, but students may not necessarily understand that. So that's why it's our obligation to create rubrics that are going to be more feasible for them. So these are the different type of rubrics that you can create. So first you have an analytical rubric. So that's pretty much breaking down your assessment into separate components, with each component having their own set of criteria and levels of achievement. That's probably the one that we use the most. So next you have holistic. That's pretty much like a single overall score of the entire work. And you're considering the work as a whole as opposed to those individual categories. It's less detailed than an analytical rubric, but it can be efficient in assessing the overall performance. Then you have single point rubrics that specifies criteria for success without predetermined levels of achievement. So that means that you wouldn't want to use words like poor, but you do want to make sure that they're at a certain level of proficiency. So these are things like exceeds expectation, meets expectations, or did not meet expectations. So when you're crafting a rubric, you definitely want to stay away from being insufficient. So that means, or excuse me, ineffective. So that means not using jargon where students wouldn't necessarily understand, being vague about your assessment, and in any words or terms or language that's going to penalize the student. To be more effective in the creation of your rubrics, of course, use student-friendly language. That's a big thing, especially for the type of students that we deal with. So we have to understand that our students, again, are not necessarily equipped with that level of knowledge that maybe we were when we were in high school. So we have to use that language to help them transition, and of course, to help them see that now that they're on an academic level, this is the type of things that we'll see. You also want to make sure that you're supporting the assignments and course outcomes when you're creating your rubric. So I mentioned this earlier about making sure that they connect, making sure that you are providing clarity. And I want to emphasize, don't focus solely on grammar. That is a way to pretty much scare students, because the moment that they see that grammar is worth majority of the rubric, they're only going to focus on the grammar part, but they're not going to focus on the content part. So this goes back to my point about the high priority concerns, getting students to understand that you want to focus on the content, the supporting details and evidence and organization, as opposed to focusing so much on your grammar. Of course, grammar still is a concern, but it should only be a concern if it obstructs the meaning of what the student is trying to articulate. So this is why we don't want rubrics to just only focus on grammar. When you're crafting your rubrics and you want to make them successful, of course, you want to make sure that you're deciding on your assignment criteria. So that pretty much means that if you want to focus on organization, evidence, format, for example, then decide what categories are going to be the most important to you. Then decide those criteria based on your discipline and the course objectives. So the way that we would assess writing 1301 is not going to be necessarily the way that computer science or religion or history would assess. So you want to think about the criteria that aligns with your discipline. And then from there, you want to develop categories. Now, typically, I like to do exceeds expectation, meets expectation, or does not meet expectations. I have found this to be a little bit more engaging for students. And I think sometimes when they see the terms like superior or poor, they kind of, go into a shell and think, oh, I'm not good. And sometimes that means they just probably just haven't met the expectations of the assignment. So those are some things that you want to think about when it comes to your categories and, again, the language that you're using. Okay, so I talked about a lot. So these are just some of the key takeaways for everything that I have discussed. It's just making sure that you are aligning your learning outcomes for assignment with the definition for written communication. focus more on real-world application for students, implement scaffolding for progressive development, provide comprehensive guidelines, and of course, employ realistic and constructive rubrics. So now, are there questions for me? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I talked a lot. No questions?
That was great, very helpful.
Thank you. And I'm glad you found it helpful. I know I talked a lot.
We can still send students to the writing center, right?
Of course you can. Of course. I would love to see your students.
I don't have any questions, but I really do like the frequently asked questions. To put that in there, I think that is going to be really helpful to a lot of students.
Yes, I just started doing this last semester and it helped clear so much confusion with students. And now I took feedback that I got from a survey to create more frequently asked questions just to kind of continue to improve on that assignment. So again, there's no room for ambiguity.
Mhm. And I guess, so in your frequently asked questions, do you usually ask questions that are yes or no based, or is it a mixture of, is it a mixture of a more detailed answer than just yes or no with an explanation?
Yeah, it's a mixture. So for example, I always give students an analysis paper where they have to either pick like a song or a music video. So one of the frequently asked questions that I have is, can I do a Beyonce song? I'll say, no, you cannot. And I'll explain my reasoning. Some other people will ask or have asked, do we need sources for this assignment? No, per the assignment guidelines, you are not required to have any sources for this. So it just depends on the question that has been asked most commonly to whether it's just going to be a yes or no or an expanded response.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Are there other questions?
Ms. Johnson, thank you so much for a very comprehensive and thorough and enlightening discussion on creating written communication assignments.
Thank you for having me as always, Dr. Leverett. I just put my email in the chat box. So if you do have questions, maybe tomorrow, next week, whatever, definitely feel free to email me. And if you want me to come to your class or one of my tutors to come to your class, we will do that for you as well.